Hello, everyone. Getting ready then for the start of the new academic year, as I'm sure many of you are as well. So perhaps we're getting ready for new groups of students, or perhaps finally meeting our current students in a face-to-face classroom, having been teaching them online previously. So what does it mean going back to school for the start of a new year or a course? Well, of course, I think it's important to get to know everybody in the class. And we can use that information then to build and develop positive relationships between the students and the teacher and among the students themselves. And of course, this is our chance as teachers to set the right tone for learning through the first activities that we use with them. What does getting to know everyone mean? Well, for me, it means the teacher getting to know the students and the students getting to know the teacher, of course, but importantly, the students getting to know each other because they may or may not have met beforehand. I guess this is first and foremost about learning each other's names and learning a little bit about each other. For example, finding out who everyone is, what they're interested in, what they studied before, what we have in common, or what's different. And I guess also finding out what the goals, the needs, and the wants of our individual students are. Of course, we can't do this in one lesson alone, and this kind of knowledge, it will grow as the weeks go by. But I think it's a good idea to get the ball rolling on day one. And getting to know each other really means that we are showing the students that we see them as individuals. And as the teacher then, we can use the information about these individuals to try and adapt our lessons to the needs and interests of each student as much as possible, as well as trying to build that positive relationship amongst everybody in the class, building up rapport. So for me, this means helping students to take an interest in each other, to try and be supportive of each other, and enabling them to recognize that they've got shared interests and shared characteristics. And through the way that we develop this and we teach them when we start these activities at the beginning, I think we can set the right tone right from day one. So this means building a learning environment that encourages each person to get the best out of themselves and support them to progress in their own learning. The idea really is to, of course, put students at the center of the learning process, student-centered learning. And although that's kind of obvious to us as teachers, it may not always be familiar to our students. Perhaps their previous experience has been more teacher-centered, sitting, listening to the teacher explain and talk, rather than participating in active learning and active communication tasks. So for me then, it's looking at student-centered icebreakers that we use right from the start to energize our class in English and to break down any nervousness or shyness that they may be feeling in the classroom with us and perhaps with their peers who they don't know. And we can kick off the getting to know you process. So I thought today I'd share with you a few of my favorites. These have been borrowed from many people and some of them perhaps might be familiar to you, but I'm going to add a few tips and a few ideas to some of the old tried and tested techniques that we might have used in the past. And for me, I think getting back into the classroom face to face, wow, what a great opportunity to now do those more physically active tasks that perhaps we couldn't really do online. And we can really enjoy the freedom of movement in the classroom, which is so important, not only for young learners, but really for anyone, adults as well. So icebreakers, practical things. My icebreaker number one then, I like to call this quick introductions. So let's get our students out of their seats right at the beginning, communicating in English with as many in the class as possible. So first of all, ask your students to stand up and greet as many people as they can in a limited time period, perhaps let's say 5 minutes. And if it's culturally appropriate, ask them to go around shaking hands with as many people as they can. As they shake hands, they should say their name and give 3 interesting facts about themselves. And as the teacher, why not join in just to show them that you are a member of the class as well, and you can give some interesting facts about yourself. Then once they've done that, regroup them into perhaps smaller groups of 3 or 4 students, and within that group, ask them to introduce each other, recalling what they can remember about the individuals in their groups. The students can then confirm or correct or add more information within their groups. I guess with younger students or those with lower levels of English, it's best to perhaps support them with the language that they'll need for introductions and also for giving information about themselves. You could also limit the facts that you want them to give. For example, they just say one thing I like, one thing I can do, and one thing I'm good at. Okay, icebreaker number 2. This is something similar, but I think we can do it in perhaps a more physical, get-up, controlled way that allows students to perhaps meet as many students as they can in the group. But we're going to do that by forming a circle. And just to show you what I mean, I'll just bring up a little picture of this. It's an introduction circle. So the idea here is that instead of getting students up and mingling around, put the students into 2 circles. You have an inner circle, you can see on the screen that's B students, and an outer circle, that would be A students. Students on the inside will face the students on the outside who will be their partner. And then give students a time limit, for example, just 1 minute, and ask them to say hello, give their name, and 1 piece of personal information about themselves, and then finally to ask their partner a question, any question they want. So A and B do that together. Then, after that 1 minute, get them to change partners by asking the inner circle to move 1 place to the left. That will then give them a new partner. And you can repeat the task. So say hello, give your name and 1 piece of interesting information, and ask a question. And then you can repeat by rotating the inner circle so that students can meet a few different people. You can, of course, adapt the content of the greetings and the interviews and the time limit to the age and language level of your students. My next icebreaker, this will be a familiar one to you all, but it's a good one, isn't it? It's the Find Someone Who questionnaire. It's always a popular way of interviewing and sharing information amongst a group, especially as it gets students up and about, mingling to interview everyone. I'm sure you're familiar with this. Statements in the questionnaire are turned into a question, and students then ask everyone the question until they find somebody who says yes. So on the screen, that statement has been to France. Students need to turn it into a question. Have you been to France? And they go around the room asking, have you been to France? Have you been to France? And when a student says yes, they write down their name. But 2 tips I'd like to share to make this activity perhaps more communicative and worthwhile. My first tip, make sure students know how to form accurate questions for each statement. You can get them to write the question first, and you might want to drill the pronunciation before they start their interviews. Sometimes turning the statement into a question can be a bit tricky. That first one, for example, the has been to, students have to turn it into have you been to? Or in the second example, speaks 3 languages, they have to turn that into the tricky do you speak 3 languages? So get them to perhaps practice those, write them down, check the pronunciation, particularly intonation for that. That would be my first tip. And then my second tip, during the interview, if a student says yes to the question, then the interviewer should ask 1 more question of their choice, a free question to get extra information. And I put that 3rd column on the screen, extra interesting fact, so that you build up a little dialogue of kind of real, genuine information getting in this activity. So for example, if I ask my friend Miriam, have you been to France? And she says yes. So I write down Miriam next to the statement, and then I follow up with an additional question. That might be, Miriam, why did you go to France? And then I note down her answer in the 3rd column. Again, it's always a good idea to model this with your students. And with younger students, perhaps limit the type of question forms that you want them to use. So perhaps they just ask a do you like question, and you could use pictures of vocabulary that they know instead of words on the questionnaire. A fun questionnaire, though, for young students is can you questions, and I shared with you a few on the screen here. So the interviewer just has to ask, can you speak 3 languages? Can you draw an aeroplane? And they follow up with show me. So then the student has to do it. They have to say maybe words in 3 languages. They have to quickly draw an aeroplane for them. And that way then the students are getting a real bit of interaction. It's an information gap that I think helps us to break the ice. My next one, I call a human bar graph or a human bar chart. With this activity, you put number cards on the floor. On the screen, for example, you can see there's a card with 0, a card with 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 plus. And then you ask a class a question. For example, how many brothers and sisters do you have? And instead of answering, you get the students to stand in a line next to the correct number card. So if they don't have any brothers or sisters, they stand next to the number card 0. If they've got 4 brothers and sisters, they stand next to the number card 4. And they therefore form a line, a human bar graph. And once students are in the correct line, you can ask them to talk to the people around you, next to you, giving more information. In this example, they could ask, what's the name of your brother, or what's the name of your sister? Are they older than you? Are they younger than you? So they can have a little conversation about the topic. And then after a short time, change the question. For example, how many languages do you speak? And you ask the students then to line up and again move to the appropriate number card. What I particularly like about this icebreaker is that it shows students in a very visual way the similarities and differences amongst students in the class. It's also good to share information about yourself, the teacher. Students are always interested in who you are, and this also allows you then to model the task before the students do the same activity themselves. So my next icebreaker is called Who Am I? Write 6 or 8 facts about yourself on the board, as you can see in the screen here. This can be brief words, it can be numbers, it can be a quick drawing. There should be a mix of obvious and less obvious, interesting facts about yourself, whatever you feel comfortable sharing and whatever is appropriate for the age and the language level of your students. So this might be, for example, your hobbies. You can see on the screen that would be theatre and drama and art for me. Perhaps your favorite film or your favorite book or the name of your pet. So you put that information up and first then ask students in pairs to predict what this information on the board might refer to. Then get the students to ask you questions so that you reveal the answers and they can therefore check whether their predictions were correct. Do an example together. So for example, point here to your name on the board and elicit or get from a student the question, what's your name? You then answer it, Jonathan Hadley, and you cross it off. Write the correct question forms on the board as you go along, and if appropriate, you can check the pronunciation of these questions, especially again the intonation for questions. If students ask you a question that doesn't match a fact on the board, well, you've got a choice. You can either answer the student giving the extra information, or you can say, sorry, that's not one of those, try a different question. And you therefore continue with this question and answer till all the facts on the board have been covered. Finally, students can use the same questions from the board to interview each other. And I recommend at the end, as a kind of whole class feedback, get each student to share the most interesting fact that they learned about their partner. Finally, I think as well as getting this personal information about our students and ourselves, it's also useful near the beginning when you're breaking ice to share the goals, the needs, and the wants of individuals, because then they find out whether their goals and wants and needs are quite similar to others. And that's a good form of ice breaking as well, finding out that actually, even if you're a little nervous in the class, other people are looking for similar kinds of advice and support from the teacher and their friends. So this activity, the suitcase activity, it kind of combines the two areas of personal information and then focusing on goals, needs, and wants. So tell the students that they bring lots of information with them to class and that it's useful to share this information both with the teacher and with other students. And in this activity, they'll have a chance to compare what they bring to the class with other members of the group. So to do this, put a suitcase image on the board, as you see in front of you here, and divide it into 4 sections and get the students to copy this onto paper. In one section, perhaps top left, ask students to write in note form a few personal facts about themselves that are interesting for others. And then in the top right, ask them to write again in note form their goals for the course. And in the bottom left, anything that they would like to focus on in class, so what they want or what they need. And then finally, in the bottom right of the suitcase, advice that they'd like to give to their teacher. That can be useful for us to know what style of class or what type of activity or how they like to learn. Again, these topics are not fixed in stone. I would adapt them to whatever best suits the needs of your class and the age of your students. So just use those topic areas as a guide. Then ask students to label the suitcase with their name. And finally, put these suitcase pictures up on the wall and give students time to carry out a gallery walk. So they're going to walk around the classroom, looking at everybody's suitcase and reading that information. Students can then reflect in pairs on what they've learned about each other. And hopefully it reassures them that other people there are interested in similar things or have the same needs and wants and goals, building up a nice atmosphere. So I hope these activities give you some ideas for your first few classes. I'm going to be doing another webinar next week, as Will said, and that's going to be looking at building up a supportive classroom environment. There'll be a link in the chat box to a handout of what I've just been talking about. Do adapt these activities to the English level and the age of your students, as well as your teaching context. Breaking the ice with these kind of activities, I think, really shows students how much you value them as individuals and the importance you place on building up a friendly, supportive group. So icebreakers also really demonstrate that in your class, you're going to get students active right from the start, using English for meaningful communication. So good luck with your first few classes.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. That was absolutely wonderful. A really nice sort of one-stop shop for all those really nice mini activities. I don't know if you call them mini, if that's the right way of saying it, but they are sort of smaller activities that really allow the students to just get up and start using their voice with their students, which is often just the most difficult step for the students, right?
Yeah, sure. And for the teacher, when you don't really know the students, there's kind of a bit of nervousness on both sides. But that's good. You kind of build on that and you use that then to generate fun and interactive activities.